Okay, so we're going to talk about when we have to picture things that are more abstract, things that can be difficult to picture, and I'm just going to start off by doing a story, or part of a story. So you all have done a couple, so hopefully you'll be able to follow along with me when I do this. So the first sentence is, on the morning of April 18th, 1906, a terrible earthquake shook San Francisco. What do you think a student might have trouble with?
The date.
The date. That's one thing. Anything else?
The place.
The place. The date and the place. How do you picture a date and a place? So what you would do in that situation, if the student is having trouble picturing that, you will ask questions about it. Have you ever been to San Francisco? Have you ever seen a movie that took place in San Francisco? Do you know anything about San Francisco, whatever, a sports team? Okay, they have no idea. Then you start talking about maybe landmarks. The Golden Gate Bridge is in San Francisco. They have trolley cars. If any of those things you ring a bell with the student, that's what you go with. And if it's happens more than once, if you have a student who's having trouble coming up with pictures for these abstract concepts in more than one story, that's when you'd pull out a piece of paper and you would start drawing the app pad or iPad or tool belt, we call it all those things. Now, some kids you're going to get, and they will have tested them, and they know that it's going to be difficult. They tested really poorly, and they're going to need a lot of work. Some kids, they test poorly, and then you do some stories with them, and they do fine. Sometimes the tests were really accurate, and they're struggling, and you know that they're going to need this whole thing. That's when you're going to do a formal introduction of the app pad. And it'll start with a story. You'll be doing a story. Maybe it's going to have a place in it, like San Francisco, and you'll talk about how you're going to picture that place. Maybe it's going to be a landmark, and on this one I drew an Eiffel Tower, but you would talk about landmarks that he maybe knows about, like everyone knows about the Statue of Liberty and stuff like that, and talk about how that would be a good way to picture that you're in New York City. You also would draw the sign that says "Welcome to," because that's another way to picture a place, especially one that you've never even heard of before. If you're picturing Azerbaijan, I don't have any pictures of that, so you're going to have to make a sign. If it's one of those students that you know is going to be struggling, you're going to, after you finish the story, go ahead and draw other types of signs. You'll finish the story first. You'll add that one sign, discuss what's on it, finish the story, and then you'll go back to this, and you'll talk about maybe a name tag for a person you don't know. You might go ahead and do a map, and then you'll talk about the different ways it can be used, like this map. If one sentence took place in Australia and the next sentence took place in Africa, they could look at the map and they could see, a ship with a ... following it, or they could bounce. They could physically bounce from one place to another. Those are just different ways to use these pictures for abstract concepts. And you'll know more about that as you do more stories. It's kind of confusing now, but it'll come up as you're doing stories.
So is this drawing something that you would do while you're in session, or would you have it ready before the session?
You would do it in session,
Okay.
and you would always do the drawing yourself, and you would talk with them while you're drawing it. And the drawing doesn't have to be perfect. The drawing is to remind him of what the real thing would look like. So if you're drawing a clock, he would be picturing an actual clock. Your clock just has to look enough like a clock for him to know what it is. But you can't let them draw, because either they could be totally distracted by the drawing and keep drawing forever. They could go into infinite detail. They could draw something and no one could recognize what it was. You don't even want to go into that. You just want to draw it yourself and put it on there. And it's just a tool. If they can picture something without using it, you don't even show them this. If you're doing a story with them and a place comes up and they instantly say, oh, well, I'm going to see a sign, or I've got a landmark, you don't need to pull this out. They might come up with some other way that you've never heard of. I've been working here for 20 years. Kids still come up with things that just surprise me. I'm assuming I'm going to have to introduce that, and they just come up with a way. So you always want to question them to see if they can generate an image before you go to this. So this is sort of the last resort kind of thing.
What if, even with this, they're having trouble picturing it? Could you go to the internet and say, look, here's the Eiffel Tower? Or
that wouldn't help him, because if he doesn't know what the Eiffel Tower is and he doesn't know where it is, there's no sense in picturing it.
okay.
And usually you don't need to do that, because this, like this map, you could draw just a map of Kentucky It's not that it has to be a world map, it's that a map can help you picture places. You might know where they are, but you don't know what they look like. And so any map you draw just represents all maps. He might come up with a map of the moon if they say that the ship landed at the Sea of Tranquility. I don't know where that is. I might just make up a map and write Sea of Tranquility with a star next to it. So these are just representations. Like the magnifying on the bottom, where it's magnifying on the kid's head and showing the hairs. I wouldn't picture this kid. I would picture, my story would be about an actual person, and they're talking about something that's maybe a flea. And I would zoom in and I would see an actual hair on actual skin and an actual flea. I wouldn't see the cartoon. That's just to remind you of what to picture. Okay. I've already totally deviated from all this stuff. So not all students need this. And the ones that do, for the most part, we don't do that formal introduction. That's for the students who are really struggling. Most kids will need one of these things, or two of these things, or three of these things while they're here. But you would only pull this out, again, to show them if they need it. If they're having trouble in a specific story and they don't know how to picture it, you'll either pull this out and show it to them. It could be something that's already on here, or you'll add it. But after the first few weeks, you probably won't even get it out anymore, because the goal is that they internalize all these different devices that they can use, so one just pops into their head when they need it. So usually this is just for the beginning. But of course, those struggling kids, you might have to have this out. You might just pull it out as soon as they walk in the door, because you know you're going to use it the whole time. But that's the rarity. A vast majority of the time, you add the things you're working on, and sometimes after you add them, you never have to talk about them again. And sometimes you just talk about them, you don't have to write anything down at all. But most kids will get a couple of things on here, and then that's all you'll have to do. Let's see. So you'll start with a specific concept, whatever concept you're dealing with, and you'll add the rest later. You want to finish the story you're on so that stays fresh in their mind. Oh, yeah, this sheet is really this piece of paper itself. This isn't, we don't just hand this to the student. We're always going to draw it ourselves. This is for you. This is so that you can see, okay, he's struggling. How do I tell him? How's he going to picture weight? Well, you've got 3 different ways on here. And then when you're introducing this to him and the concept, and you have to draw it on your iPad, it gives you a little simple line drawing that you can approximate well enough. If he's doing various weights, something weighs more than something, you put the hourglass on there.
So you don't show them this?
No, you can, but no.
Okay.
Yeah. And you can't put everything on there. Some kids will only see a digital clock. The regular clock means nothing to them. But sometimes they need the regular clock to see time passing, and they'll see that spinning around. Or they'll use one kind of calendar to show days passing, and the wind will be blowing, days off the calendar. But another kind of calendar, like the one that's on here, has got a grid and a picture on the top. You can't draw all the calendars. So you might draw one calendar and then just discuss, it's saying that months are going by. How can we picture that? I have no idea. Well, what can we use to picture time? Well, a calendar, but how's that going to show months going by? Well, what could you do? How would you see months going by? They might remember a movie where they've seen the months blowing off of a calendar. They might put X's over the calendar over various days or months. So they're going to add their piece to it too. But the calendar just represents all calendars. You see what I mean? And you would just draw the pertinent ones to that student on here.
But you said you don't show this iPad to this student?
Right. Well, if you were a student and you've been here for like a week, and so you're about at the level you are now, and someone just set this in front of you with all these pictures on it, I don't want to memorize that. What is that? That's crazy. And they probably won't need all these things. So you're just going to draw what they need so that their particular iPad just has what they need on it.
Oh, got it. But you would show them that drawing.
Right. You would draw it in front of them, and
Got it. Okay.
that's theirs. So then it just goes in the student papers. The next time you're doing a story and the same issue comes up and they're having trouble, you pull it out
Yeah.
and let them see it.
Yeah. Got it. Got it.
When you're doing a drawing on this, you want to make sure you leave space, because it could be that you're going to put a landmark on there and that's all they need. It could be that a couple weeks from now a teacher's going to have to draw a map or something on there. So you want to leave space. So you might draw one thing on the top left corner, and then you might just come down and draw the next thing down below it or something, so you have space for other things that may or may not need to be added. Starting, let's say you're talking about time, and it's set on the morning of April 18th, whatever happened, and he's having trouble with the time, and you start discussing it, and he says, oh, the morning, the sun's rising. The sun rises in the morning. Okay, he just got a picture. I'm going to draw the sun rising, because that's what he's thinking of right now. And then we'll go into April 18th and all that. But whatever he came up with, that's what I'm going to start with. And also to Stephen's point about not teaching your picture to the kid, when I go into a session, what I think, what's going on in my mind is the student's picture is right. I am going to question to see if I can help that student make the picture match the facts in the story. But my picture isn't involved. So his is right, it's not matching here, how am I going to get that to match? And I'm going to make it in my picture to get you out of, and your ego sort of out of the whole equation.
Whole thought would be you take this sheet, you teach the students systematically everything on it, and they learn this technique. And that would be more of a traditional way to go about it. And as teachers, we want to teach. So let me teach you this thing. But it's the difference between giving someone a fish and giving someone a fishing pole. So if we can help them understand how they think and get them going on this idea of, I need to understand this concept in the story about time. So what can I do as a placeholder that's meaningful to me? Okay, I can use a clock. Whether it's a digital clock or an analog clock doesn't matter. But they came up with a device in their mind that holds the place for time. And then that they might on their own get to this idea, oh, this would be better for a calendar. Now they've got the concept. So regardless of the story, they understand this idea that I need a placeholder that's meaningful to me. If we teach this as though this is the right way to do it, then they're going to get busy with how should I do this? So they're reliant on something else to tell them how to do it rather than reaching inside themselves to go, I need this idea covered. How am I going to do it? If we actually tried to systematize this, we'd have probably a 100-page book of tons of icons, and suddenly this is more about something else. So we can't be in this position where we're trying to teach them everything they need to know, because it loses the mark of the whole concept of this. The idea is, and this goes back to what I've been talking about in terms of metacognition, which is we're really trying to teach someone how to think. So it's not about covering all the bases per se, it's about covering it to the point where they can do this on their own. It doesn't matter what the thing is. They get it, they know what to put in that works for them. This is not about teaching them to picture how you picture. So this is not, there's not this hidden agenda that as the instructor, I have the right picture, and my questioning is to bring you to my picture. And then there becomes this dynamic of the student trying to figure out if his or her picture is right or wrong based upon how you pictured it. Because that will get them to this point where they're back dependent on someone. Rather, it's about helping them get a picture that matches the author's intent. You're the guide to do it. And your questioning develops this higher level metacognition, so they're able to think about how they think and take this all over. On the first time the concept comes up, you're going to ask a question of how would you imagine that? And then you might, your next question might be more specific to see if they can get to something like, is there something you could put in your picture to get this idea of time? And if they're still like, I have nothing, then you have a whole strategy to go to for that, which is this strategy. How you do it is going to vary with respect to the client, and Mike's going to cover that in even more detail. But
this is just what I saw. I was like,
but this is to get away from this idea of having the session tank. This is the toolkit that you can reach to open it up and hear all the options, and then you can work from there. I hope you can see the difference between teaching the learning process and teaching content. And so much of what we do in education is teaching content. It's about having the right flag or the right spelling, or, well, we're through this paragraph, let's make sure we learn what they're saying.
when you teach a process, again, you're trying to build the fishing pole. And so it's not that we don't care that someone knows the right flag. It's just that if you try to do everything, you're going to get nothing done. So if you sit there and you try to make sure you have the right spelling for Palm Springs, and that you've got the right spelling for California, and that you've got the shape right for the state, and like if you worry about getting all this right, you're going to turn this into a lesson where they're going to be more focused on, do I have it right or not? Oh, I didn't get it right. And then it's going to take a long time to get through that paragraph. And so if it takes an hour to get through that, and you essentially inadvertently beat the kid up doing that, they're going to leave exhausted and with no joy through that process. And they're going to be like, well, this is too hard, it's not fun, why would anyone do that? I mean, they may not verbalize that, but that's what they're going to leave with. So rather, the other way to see this is, if each day I can move his thinking forward a little bit, to think about how he thinks, to understand that language actually makes a movie in my mind. I get to be the director. It's on my picture. I get to own this. It's not about getting it perfect. It's about advancing the ball a little bit at a time, and doing that in a way that you cycle through stories with enough frequency to where it's not boring. Then over a 20, 30, 40 hours, they have moved that ball a little bit at a time each day, far enough down the field where they can now read something and get the right idea. So that by the end of this process, then they can worry about going into content and getting something right. If you ask every question there is, the story will go on forever. So you have to choose your questions. And that's why there's a point where you just give them the information, you don't question them.
So let's say that you've got a kind of a medium older student, and they say, I think it was in Japan mentioned in the story, and they say, oh yeah, I know I'm in Japan because I can picture the flag, it's pink and purple polka dotted. And then when they retell you, they say, oh yeah, I see that flag, it's got the pink and purple polka dots, we're in Argentina. If like that flag doesn't really have enough meaning to help them remember the place, do you suggest direct to a different way to remember? Do you direct to put a word on the flag? I know you don't say, oh no, Japan's flag is white with the red.
Right.
What do you do to make their picture strategy actually work if it's not working?
So you're not going to know that doesn't work until you're at the end of the story.
Right.
So it's too late for that one.
Right.
But when they tell you what the flag looks like and you realize it doesn't match, you could ask them a couple of questions about other flags or something. If they actually believe this, if that flag pops into their head because they saw it at some point, maybe it was a joke, but that means, and that's fine, because it's not about the flag, it's about Japan. But if it's just a flag they're making up, and they're just saying, well, I know it's a Japan flag because I just made it up in Japan, then it's not going to work because it's not connected to anything in reality.
So how do you air handle that to make
Well, in that situation, you're going to know. As soon as they say it's a pink and purple flag, you're going to know he's just making it up because no one's come across a flag like that. It would be more realistic. Like, I think the African flag is black, green, and orange. I don't know if it is or not, but if you really think it is and it works for you, that's fine. But the way I'd error handle it is saying, I'd say, is that really what you think? I mean, have you seen this flag before? Where have you seen it before?
Okay.
If they've seen it in a movie, maybe they've watched a cartoon and that flag popped up and that's stuck in their head, that's fine. At some point, somebody's going to teach them that that's not really what the flag looks like, but I'm not.
But
because
if it doesn't work though, when they
If it
reach
doesn't
out
work,
to you
then-
and they think, and they say they just know flags are for places, and so they created this flag and they know it's a place, but they don't really remember. So how do you get them to create either a new or correct the old, or how do you fix their?
Well, in that situation, if you're doing the word summary and that's when you find out they
Yeah.
don't know, then you would go back and you start talking about that flag
Okay.
to find out where it really came from. And then you would talk about what other ways can we
Okay.
picture it? Are there other ways other than flags? Have you ever seen a movie, blah, blah, blah? And then if not, that's when you pull out this and you start talking about maps and
Okay.
landmarks and stuff.
Okay.
And for a lot like Japan, everyone's seen a movie.
Yeah.
that has Japan. Well, there's got to be a World War II movie or something. England, just Harry Potter.
Yeah.
A lot of kids will say, "I have no idea what England looks like." You say Harry Potter, oh, I know exactly what England looks like. So sometimes they don't know what they know, and sometimes they think they know what they don't know, and you just have to sort of dive in and help them figure it out.
Thanks.
Let me add a piece there too. You may keep a little sheet of paper next to or in the margin of the notes where you observe some things that you know need to get included, but in the middle of that story is probably not the right time. So you may do the flag thing, they may do the word summary, you realize that didn't work. You may even choose not to handle it right then, finish it up, and then at the end of the story say, let's cover a couple of items. And then you do it in between the story and talk about it. So again, you want to try to keep the story moving and close it out. That's the time to bring up some other items. And then you can start the next story. And you might start choosing stories that have that theme. So you might start with a kid on Monday and realize, okay, they're really good with names, but they're terrible with dates. Or they're really good with names and dates, but they're really not good with like locations. So that's going to be your theme for the week.
One school of thought would be you take this sheet, you teach the students systematically everything on it, and they learn this technique. And that would be more of a traditional way to go about it. And as teachers, we want to teach. So let me teach you this thing. But it's the difference between giving someone a fish and giving someone a fishing pole. So if we can help them understand how they think and get them going on this idea of, I need to understand this concept in the story about time. So what can I do as a placeholder that's meaningful to me? Okay, I can use a clock. Whether it's a digital clock or an analog clock doesn't matter. But they came up with a device in their mind that holds the place for time. And then that they might on their own get to this idea, oh, this would be better for a calendar. Now they've got the concept. So regardless of the story, they understand this idea that I need a placeholder that's meaningful to me. If we teach this as though this is the right way to do it, then they're going to get busy with how should I do this? So they're relying on something else to tell them how to do it rather than reaching inside themselves to go, I need this idea covered. How am I going to do it? If we actually tried to systematize this, we'd have probably a 100-page book of tons of icons, and suddenly this is more about something else. So we can't be in this position where we're trying to teach them everything they need to know, because it loses the mark of the whole concept of this. The idea is, and this goes back to what I've been talking about in terms of metacognition, which is we're really trying to teach someone how to think. So it's not about covering all the bases per se, it's about covering it to the point where they can do this on their own. It doesn't matter what the thing is. They get it, they know what to put in that works for them. This is not about teaching them to picture how you picture. So this is not, there's not this hidden agenda that as the instructor, I have the right picture, and my questioning is to bring you to my picture. And then there becomes this dynamic of the student trying to figure out if his or her picture is right or wrong based upon how you pictured it. Because that will get them to this point where they're back dependent on someone. Rather, it's about helping them get a picture that matches the author's intent. You're the guide to do it. And your questioning develops this higher level metacognition, so they're able to think about how they think and take this all over. On the first time the concept comes up, you're going to ask a question of how would you imagine that? And then you might, your next question might be more specific to see if they can get to something like, is there something you could put in your picture to get this idea of time? And if they're still like, I have nothing, then you have a whole strategy to go to for that, which is this strategy. How you do it is going to vary with respect to the client, and Mike's going to cover that in even more detail. But
This is just what I saw. I was like,
But this is to get away from this idea of having the session tank. This is the toolkit that you can reach to open it up and here are all the options, and then you can work from